special honor of introducing my congressman, Louis Gohmert, tonight. We're all Texans. I grew up in Dallas, and I love Dallas. And I'm proud to be a Texan, but boy, am I proud to be an East Texan. And part of it is because we do have Louis Gohmert there representing us. And he also really reflects our community, which is a very Christian-based community, is it not? And so I'm going off script. I'm sorry. But I just want to say that we appreciate that we have your voice in Washington, because many of us are at the point where we're forgetting the nation in some ways, and we're so focused on Texas. But we are so grateful to have you stand up for us at the national level, and to stand up for patriots, and to not be afraid to say the truth and what needs to be said during these times. Yep. We need extraordinary leaders like you, and we are so grateful. And in case y'all didn't know, East Texas loves Louis Gohmert.
Thank you. What a nice way for you to go off script. That was great. And I love being here with you. We've got, you just feel the warmth, you feel the love. And it's amazing that the left has gotten away with calling us haters for years. We don't hate people. We love them enough to tell them the truth, and they don't get that. But it tells you a lot about them. They must hate people that disagree with them, so they presume that when they disagree with us, we hate them. That's just not the case. For any Christian who does not have love, you're not actually a Christian. And that's the bottom line. But, and Kevin, I thought maybe you were just going to avoid having to listen to me. But you came back.
I'm here.
So let me tell you, anytime you have minute and a half to spare, I'd love to get you to cut my hair. Well, there you go. Hopefully I'll get a special rate. And it doesn't take much to really torque off the left. I gave just what I thought was, a logical idea out there, because we know that in the best societies that have ever existed, the family was the building block, and that was so important. So I catch all kinds of crud, and I get called the dumbest guy in Congress. And I'm going, that's the best you got? Couldn't you maybe come up with 3 syllables instead of just 2? But the example that I was shocked, really still, I'll have people bring it up, in a hateful way. But I said, well, okay, we could do a scientific experiment to see what nature prefers. Well, how would you do that? So, well, you take, say, 4 or 5 couples, a man or woman couple, and put them on an island where they've got everything they need. And then you put the same number of couples of just men on an island. And then you take the same number of just female couples and put them on an island. Make sure they got everything they need. And then come back in 100 years and see which one nature. I thought that was quite a ideological approach. But somehow, follow the science, exactly. Because those that ever mention nature and nature's God, like founding documents, like one of my heroes, Clarence Thomas. And by the way, he is a brilliant man. He's a brilliant man. And he doesn't get the credit. But I just love that man. And Jenny is wonderful. But I was visiting with him one day in his office, maybe 2.5 hours. It wasn't supposed to be that long, but we just get talking. And if any of y'all read his autobiography that he did, my grandfather's son, because you know he had no relationship with his father. Sound familiar? And really, his mom wasn't in his life hardly at all. He lived about 6 months with her in Atlanta, and he hated it, but he loved being with his grandparents out on the Georgia coast. But his dad, his grandfather, he considered his father, but his grandfather had one line that he said all the time. Anytime Clarence or his brother said, well, I can't do that, he would always say the same thing. Old man Kent's dead, I helped bury him. And so before I left, I said, you've got all these really cool throw pillows that all have great lines embroidered on them, but I thought I would see your grandfather's favorite line. And he pointed up, there was a bust of his grandfather way up high, and on it, it had his dates. He was born, when he died, and then old man Kent's dead, I helped bury him. So that's the way he was raised. I don't want to hear Kent, because we hear Kent all the time, right? Well, let me tell you, I spent a summer in the Soviet Union between my sophomore and junior year at A&M, and there were 8 Americans allowed in that summer. And the thing that depressed me so much was the line that I heard constantly from Soviet college students. And you know, if you read historically, you read about Marxist movements, the college kids are the intelligentsia. They're the ones that are so smart, they'll make all the great revolution happen. And I thought at some point the college students in the Soviet Union, and I found out they knew they were being lied to all the time. And anytime one of them would say, well, but they're lying to us about that, I would say, but doesn't that bother you? And they would respond with this same Russian line, there's nothing to be done. The fatalism was the best thing that the Soviet government had going for it, to make people think there's just nothing you can do. Well, now, that's anti-American sentiment, and it's sure anti-Texas sentiment, because there are things that can be done. And some of you have heard me say before, one of the things that frustrates me the most is the fact there are so many Christians in Congress, but they're almost like those Russians, you know, there's nothing to be done, and except they say it a different way. And it's a cop-out, but the line is, Louis, we don't have to worry about it, God's in control. Yeah. Can you see Rafael Cruz saying that? Well, there's nothing I can do. God's in control, there's nothing I can do. And I listened to a 12-hour Bible study on probably my least favorite book, Ecclesiastes, by a preacher up in Denton named Tommy Nelson. Never met the man. I like the way he teaches. Y'all know him? I've never met him.
I don't know.
So he's going through, and toward the end he says, Yes, God is sovereign. God's in control. But just because he's in control doesn't mean he wants you to lean on your shovel and pray for a hole. Everybody in here has been given some tools by God. And they may be tools you really don't want to use, but you've been given tools, and if we're going to save this country through the grace of God, we're going to have to be using those tools, everything we got, because the left has been using theirs for years. And I was late to the game to figure out what was happening, but as I went back and tried to retrace what had happened, apparently, and if you're familiar, there's a book that comes out called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. And so we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, the left started getting involved in the organizations, the psychiatric, psychological organizations that help put those together, but they have all of the names of potential diagnoses, and they started lobbying to get those changed. And for so long, it was considered that homosexuality and anything other than heterosexuality was a mental disease. By lobbying, all these years, they were getting those diagnoses changed in the DSM. And till now, in the last DSM, it is just what Kevin was talking about, gender dysphoria. Well, they've lobbied all this time, and that's the best they've gotten to. And what does that mean? Well, dysphoria is a bit like the opposite of euphoria, but it's gender confusion. And it's not a good thing. If any of y'all read the article that Dr. Paul Mchugh wrote back in 2016, yeah, a number of you had. I didn't know if you'd seen a program on that. Dr. Mchugh spoke out quite a bit. I had him on as a guest on one of the shows. I guest hosted radio shows. And then when I called him to come on another one, he said, well, Johns Hopkins has said I can write my articles, but I need to keep my mouth shut otherwise. But profound stuff. But it was the Wall Street Journal printed or reprinted an article he wrote. But he was the first person to say, you know, trying to do sex change or even have puberty blockers that can cause sterility, can shorten people's lives. That's child abuse. That's not something that we ought to be doing. Even to just slow down puberty, you are doing harm to that child in the name of, well, we'll let him figure out what he is. And he mentions in his article that the huge majority of people that have gender confusion as a young child grow out of it without ever having counseling if you just leave them alone and let them do their own thing. And the example that I've heard him give before is, you know, how many people knew tomboys growing up that end up being beauty queens and being some of the most feminine folks around. You just let the kids work through it most of the time. Sometimes there's mental disorder involved that, you know, there's counseling needed. But how dramatic to pass legislation that says if somebody is really confused about their gender, one group of people over here that believe the family is what it's historically been in the Bible and throughout time in really healthy civilizations, they don't get to participate. They can't have anything to say. We've got to shut down their freedom of speech. But as that changed in the DSM, then there were people that were looking for ways, and they figured out if we can muzzle judges so they can't say anything about what they think is a healthy environment for a family, then we won. Because if the judges can't, then they're going to end up muzzling the lawyers, and then there won't be any evidence ever put on to say that we believe this, even whether it's dysphoria, disorder, whatever, you can't put that evidence on, and therefore they end up winning every family custody case. So it was right after I went on the bench as a state district judge, our Texas Supreme Court, which they write the rules for judges. There's no vote on those other than the Supreme Court. And it was a big majority conservative Supreme Court led by a staunch conservative named Tom Phillips. Nathan Hecht was on there. We had some great justices on there. And they come out with a preliminary order saying these are what we're going to change our orders to. And one of them said, a judge shall not by words or conduct manifest any bias or prejudice based on race, creed, color, gender, all this kind of stuff, national origin, all the things you expect. And they added or sexual orientation or social position, something like that. And so Nathan happened to be in Smith County right after that, and a couple of us were saying, do you understand what you're doing here? And he said, oh, this is not going to change anything. I said, it's going to change everything. Because if you make this the permanent rule for judges, then there will ultimately be custody hearings where somebody will want to put on evidence, say for example, that one of the spouses is having really exotic sexual relations in front of the children and very small children. And he said, no, that would never happen. I said, at some point, the U.S. Supreme Court is going to say you use the words sexual orientation, and those words mean exactly what they say. It's whatever you're oriented towards sexually. Anything. Those words are going to be taken to mean exactly what they say. He said, not as long as I'm on the Supreme Court. And I said, you're not going to always be on the Supreme Court. Well, it turns out, just like I called it in 1993, that's the way it went. And so early on, right after Nancy Pelosi took over as Speaker in the U.S. House of Representatives, in the Judiciary Committee, we take up a hate crime law. And sexual orientation is, really critical part of that. And so there were a few of us that were saying, and we were in the minority, but we're saying, look, okay, you're going to pass whatever you want to pass. You've got the majority, you've got the votes. And you made clear that sexual orientation means heterosexuality or homosexuality. But there's a lot of things out there that you surely admit are not healthy. Pedophilia, necrophilia, bestiality, all kinds of things. So why don't you put in a definition and say sexual orientation means heterosexuality, homosexuality. And that way you're not including crimes like pedophilia. And they fought putting any definition, and I look back and realize this is where they were gunning for all along.
Right. That was the goal.
Where there is nothing that can be said to be inappropriate without the person that says it's inappropriate being a hater. That's where it was going, and that's where they've gotten. And it's rather unfortunate. Of course, the way it was drafted, the federal hate crime laws, to be a crime, you must choose your victim based on a recognizable group. Well, you could actually, if you went after an Aggie, you know, that.
That's too easy of a target.
It's too easy of a target. But it leaves it so wide open. But what got me, as someone who tried lots of felony cases, it is a complete defense. You have to be found not guilty. If the defendant got up there and raised a reasonable doubt by saying, oh, I didn't pick that person because of the race or gender or sexual orientation. I just wanted to torture somebody. I didn't care who it was. So, no, that had nothing to do. I just randomly picked somebody. That is a basis for total acquittal of the federal crime. And from my experience listening to testimony and sentencing over and over, some of the most easily rehabilitated people are people that chose somebody out of a group because of hate they had. Well, let's punish the crime. You harm somebody, you need to be punished. But there have been experiments by having victims and defendants meet, and sometimes they break down, they've broken down and wept when they hear how bad, and it can be transformative. But someone who chooses victims at random, that used to be called in old DSMs sociopath, eventually antisocial personality, psychopath, but now it's not any of those things. It's antisocial personality disorder. But the evidence that I used to hear as a felony judge was that the people that are so most difficult to ever rehabilitate are those who are antisocial personalities. And that means they know right from wrong. They could conform their conduct to the requirements of the law, but they enjoy doing wrong. They purposely enjoy doing wrong. And so how ironic that the federal hate crime law punishes much more severely somebody that has a better chance of being rehabilitated than those that don't. We'll let the ones that can't be rehabilitated out much earlier. I mean, who thought of this stuff?
Right.
Well, the left did. And it's all part of breaking down the society we knew that was the most successful ever. And if you look at Marxism, I mean, first of all, a guy that couldn't even see that a middle class was beginning to be created that would negate the need for Marxism. He was so short-sighted, he couldn't even see that. He couldn't see the idea of labor unions being started to stand up for workers. I mean, somebody that's that blind societally is not somebody we ought to be following in creating governments. It's never worked. It will never work. And yet, so many of our children have been taught socialism is really the wonderful way to go. It's share and share alike. The Pilgrims tried it. Apostle Paul tried it with some folks. Of course, Apostle Paul saw pretty quick this isn't working out. All right, new rule, if you don't work, you don't eat, you know. But the Pilgrims, at that first winter when they lost so many people, all right, let's try something different. Everybody will have their own little private property, and whatever you raise is yours. Wow, is that so much more productive And some of you may have heard me mention, but that summer visited a collective farm. I mean, it's socialism at its worst, Marxism. Thousands and thousands of acres there in Ukraine. I couldn't tell what had been cultivated. It all looked like it needed a lot of work and nobody was doing it. And anybody that has worked on a farm or ranch in the summer, especially Texas, because we're the same latitude basically as Ukraine. I used to say until I went over there, the Ukraine, but one of the Ukrainian college students said, "Do you say I'm from the Texas?" He said, "We don't say we're from the Ukraine either." Okay, stand corrected. So I'm over there and it's middle of the morning. Well, anybody's worked outside, you know, in summertime around here, you know, you get started at sunup so you can finish before it just takes you down. And it's mid-morning and it's pretty clear none of them have been out working. And so my mother, she used to say, you know, "Louis, someday you're going to say something sarcastic and forget to smile and somebody's going to knock your block off." So I remember what Mom said, so I tried to ask this with a smile so nobody get up and punch me. I'm going, "When do you work in the field?" And I thought I'd use the right Russian words, and they all laughed. So I thought, maybe I got that wrong somehow. And one of them said in Russian, "I make the same number of rubles if I'm out there in the sun as I do if I'm here in the shade, so I stay in the shade." Now, Margaret Thatcher said socialism works so you run out other people's money. That was pretty cute, but I would submit a more accurate line is socialism works until people figure out they're going to make the same amount if they work or don't work. And it falls apart. But, so it is a failure as an economic system. It will always be a failure as an economic system. There is nothing that will ever economically do better than a system that rewards hard work and ingenuity. That won't happen. But Dostoevsky, and Solzhenitsyn quoted him in the Gulag Archipelago that he wrote after he spent so many years in the Russian federal prison system, where they worked in Siberia, doing all these horrendous conditions. Natan Sharansky was there in one for years. But Dostoevsky said, the problem with socialism is not economic. Well, we know that is a problem, but he said not economic. The problem with socialism is atheism.
Yes.
And he was right. So all these things we've been talking about, and I hope you can see where I'm tying together here, it all comes back to destroying people's faith in God and what God said made a family. You know, Black Lives Matter has taken it down, but I've seen and copied what they believed at one point. It's not there anymore, but, or at least it wasn't last time I looked. But they believe they need to destroy Western-style families.
Right.
Well, now, I read that going, they're kind of confused about their geography. Western-style marriage? No. Moses said it came from God that a man shall leave his father and mother, a woman leave her home, and the two will become one flesh. And then when Jesus was asked about divorce and marriage, he quotes Moses verbatim. Man shall leave his father and mother, woman leave her home, the two will become one. And then Jesus adds a line Moses didn't say. Maybe Jesus knew something Moses didn't, but Jesus adds, and what God has joined together, nobody should separate. And then Paul quotes both of them, the apostle. So I'm going, that's not Western style marriage. That's Middle Eastern. That came from Moses and Jesus. We can't take credit for that. That's not our idea. We got it from the Middle East. So, you know, but that's how you begin to destroy the greatest, freest society that is most productive that has ever existed in the history of the world. So it's really on us. And Kevin, when you talk about your father, you know, I can tell you there are so many people that came before my court, and I'd find out how rotten their father was. And I wish the father were before me, because there was the dirty, rotten scoundrel that needed the credit for the horrible things that had gone on. But at the end of Malachi, the last verses before God was silent for nearly 500 years, you figure, well, if it's the last words that God gave to the prophets before he was silent for 5 centuries nearly, it must be pretty important. You go back and look, it's talking about when the Messiah comes, he will turn the hearts of the children back to the Father, and the hearts of the fathers back to the children. That tells you, if you want to diagnose a sick society, it's when the hearts of the fathers are not turned toward the children, and the hearts of the children are not turned to the fathers. I think we're there. But coming back to the final point, though. Oh, and by the way, have you ever met Walt Heyer?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. Don't you love that guy?
I do.
I just love Walt. What a sweetheart. Now, for
He
those
has
that
an
don't...
amazing testimony.
Pardon?
He has an amazing testimony.
He does. He believed he should be a woman, and he had the surgery, and he became physically a woman, and then he tried to kill himself another times. He transitioned back. He spends his time counseling people that may have tried to kill themselves, that have been through what he went through, and he does it because he became a Christian, and he loves these folks, and he wants to help. And, you know, and I get that sense from you, Kevin. That's who you are, that's where you are. You just want to help people not suffer like you did. Pam, aren't you proud of him? Yeah, we sure are. So let me share some words from, oh, and by the way, Walt Heyer we were talking about the military paying for sex change operations. Now, Mad Dog Mattis that Trump put in, Secretary of Defense, he's that rough. He said basically, in essence, that it is extremely important for defense to pay for sex change operations to help the good order and discipline of the military. As I told President Trump, any general or admiral that survived all of the Obama purges of those higher ranking people needs to be gone in your administration. They're doing a lot of damage. And that's where we are back to now. And Walt said, you got to realize what this will mean for anybody that wants a sex change operation. There's one place that you can go, and the sex change won't cost you anything. Of course, you have months of pre-surgery hormonal treatment, and that's paid for, post-surgery hormonal treatment. And during all that time, you're not deployable in the military, and not until it's certified by a psychiatrist that you are comfortable in your new gender. Well, my thing is, if you're going to have sex change operation, do it before you come in the military. Wait until you're comfortable in your new gender, or wait until after you leave. But our military needs equipment and things to defend the country and to defend themselves. They need body armor. They don't need things cut off of their body. They need and, you know, they're out there in some horrible situations, as we've seen in Alaska. But that was Walt saying, if you leave this policy in place long enough, it's going to draw an awful lot of people, and they're not coming to defend America. They're coming because this is the place I can get the free surgery. But Dr. Mchugh, I'm taking this from his own words. He said, first I ever read or heard any puberty blockers were malpractice. Then there's a subgroup of very young, often pubescent children who notice distinct sex roles in the culture and exploring how they fit in, begin initiating the opposite sex. Misguided doctors at medical centers, including Boston's Children's Hospital, have begun trying to treat this behavior by administering puberty-delaying hormones to render later sex change surgeries less onerous, even though the drugs stunt the children's growth and risk causing sterility. Given that close to 80% of such children would abandon their confusion and grow naturally into adult life if untreated, these medical interventions come close to child abuse. A better way to help these children is with devoted parenting. Sex change, he said, is biologically impossible. People who undergo sex reassignment surgery do not change from man to women or vice versa. Rather, they become feminized men or masculinized women. Claiming that this is a civil rights matter and encouraging surgical intervention is in reality to collaborate with and promote a mental disorder. Now, he points out Johns Hopkins was the first hospital to ever do a sex change operation in the United States. And while he was there, they had been doing analysis and interviews to find out how much good they have done, how much better off are people that have had the sex change surgeries. And what they found was they really, overall, they were no better off. So why cut off permanently different organs if you're not having a better result than you did beforehand? So they quit for a while. Now my understanding is they're back to doing them again because there's a lot of money in doing it. But Dr. Mchugh is not, he's a psychiatrist, head psychiatrist emeritus. He's not in charge there anymore. But really interesting. And then he also mentions a study, the most thorough study with the most people over the most years. I think it was 30 years. Sweden or Norway, but they 30. Yeah, you're 20 times more likely to kill yourself if you go through this procedure. Why would we do something that makes people 20 times more likely to kill themselves? That makes no sense. If you really love or care about people, why would you want to make it more likely they would kill themselves? We've got too much of that going on.
They don't care.
We've got more of that in the military than we've ever had, in the active military, among veterans. I mean, for heaven's sake, these folks need help. They don't need to make it more likely they take their own lives. But I know being filmed here and have been the whole time, but
just being loaded.
but we got a lot of work to do, and we need to work together, and we need to be encouraging each other. And Kevin, you're just a blessing. All of you that are stepping up and being counted in this fight. you're making a difference, and you're gonna make even more of a difference. So let's help them all we can. Thank y'all so much.